Där! Varmt välkomna till dagens webbinar om allt om reklamblockare och Adblock Plus. Det här är ett webbinar som vi på Dagens Analys gör tillsammans med eyeo, alltså de som äger Adblock Plus. Vi har med oss Ben Williams idag som kommer att berätta lite grann om vad Adblock Plus gör, och vi kommer även att plocka upp en del frågor som ni lyssnare och läsare har kunnat ställa innan det här webbinariet på vår hemsida. På slutet kommer det även finnas möjlighet att lyfta upp frågor från er som är med och lyssnar idag. Då kan ni skriva i chattfönstret, så kommer vi att plocka upp de frågorna i slutet sen. Så, det här webbinariet kommer även att göras tillgängligt i efterhand med en film vi spelar in det här, och även de slides som vi nu visar upp kommer att finnas tillgängliga. Så, med det så tänker jag att vi sätter igång. Det är sagt jag, Mattias Strandberg, som vanligtvis jobbar som skribent på Dagens Analys, som gör det här webbinariet och kommer leda igenom dagen. Och med oss så har vi då Ben Williams som har 4 års erfarenhet av att jobba med eyeo och Adblock Plus. Så det här är en fantastisk chans att ställa alla jobbiga och svåra frågor ni har om Adblock till någon som verkligen vet vad han pratar. Men jag tänker att vi ska börja med att ni kära deltagare ska få vara med och vara lite aktiva här också. Jag kommer att skicka ut en liten fråga till er, och ni har då möjlighet att besvara den. Och frågan som vi ställer är: använder du en reklamblockerare idag? Varsågoda och svara. Där, då tar vi och stänger röstningen. Nu har så gott som alla svar. Det verkar som att ni använder reklamblockerare i ungefär 50% av fallen. Men inte i mobilen. Och en stor del tycker att de absolut inte ska använda reklamblockerare. Jätteintressant, stort tack för det. Vi kommer att återvända till fler post lite senare. Så, när vi går tillbaka till presentationen, och nu är det dags att släppa in Ben Williams och få börja med att berätta lite grann om vad Adblock Plus gör för någonting. Take it away, Ben. I just gave a short introduction. We did a short poll, as you probably saw. We have 43% of the attendees using an ad blocker, but only on desktop, and 43% don't use it at all. So, with no further ado, please join us and tell us a bit about Adblock Plus and what you're all doing.
Thanks, Matthias, and thanks for everybody at Dagens on the news for, I'm mispronouncing that, but for having me on today and allowing us at Adblock Plus to sort of tell our story. I guess I'm on that fourth slide right now, and what I'll have to do, I can't actually change the slide myself, so I'll just have to tell someone to do that. So for those of you listening, as we proceed through the slides, I'll be saying that. Maybe Matthias already told you that. I didn't understand that bit. My Swedish is not up to snuff, I'm afraid. But so as we get started today, what I'd like to do is, as the title suggests, just talk about ad blocking's place in advertising's future. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold as well. So, in any case, I think that you may be surprised at some of the things that I have to say today, some of the things that we have thought about at Adblock Plus, because essentially we have come to the point where ad blocking has now changed, and we've had to adjust. And anytime something changes, of course, it means that something was not right. And so the last thing you'll hear me say today is that it was anyone particular person or group's fault that ad blocking occurred, or that ads find themselves in the position that they're in right now, which is not the best one. And so what I hope to do at the end of it is show you where ad blocking fits into this story, because it plays a pivotal role, and how I think it's going to basically make the future of ads not a worse place, but a better place. So that being the case, let's get started to the next slide, please. I always like to start with dessert, and this is just the elephant in the room that everyone probably already knows. According to PageFair, an Irish company that does a lot of statistics around ad blocking, there are now 615 million people who block ads. So that's the status quo. What I'm going to do now is go through ad blocking, how we got to this point, and also, in order to arrive at where we're going in the future, we'll of course have to look at the past, not just of ad blocking, but also of advertising. So we'll start with how we got to this point, the status quo in ad blocking. If you could go to the next slide. The very first ad blocker that was ever anything like an ad blocker was called WebWasher. This was something you could use on Firefox, and it was made by a guy in Germany in the city of Paderborn. Now, it worked very similarly to the way ad blockers do now. If you notice, in the middle there, you see a bunch of HTTP addresses. Those are just filters. Ad blocking up to now still relies upon filters to block ads. It essentially just takes things online, and there are filters to remove those things from the user experience. So already back in 2004, we have this, and actually a very primitive ad blocking script had been written already in 2002. So ad blocking had been around for a while. Next slide, please. Then in 2006, we came along, and we, Adblock Plus, were at that point a Firefox extension. Not very many users, but that changed very quickly. And the reason is because we were able to make the very sort of daunting technical task of blocking ads with filters much easier by offering filters as subscriptions. So you essentially just subscribe to a series of filters that do a similar thing, like block ads or block tracking. Next slide, please. But we've hit a bit of a desktop plateau. The latest numbers that I have for Sweden are that 27% of people use ad blocking on their computers. So slightly less nationwide than the amount we just got in our poll, but this is strictly from desktop usage. What we found in a lot of countries is that desktop usage plateaus at about that point. We don't expect that it'll get much above that, and we think that those numbers, even 27%, is probably a little bit north of where it actually is. These are also numbers from PageFair, which is our best source. But if we're being honest, PageFair does have a bit of an interest in portraying ad blocking as a big phenomenon because they offer anti-ad blocking tools. So you have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt. But what we found is that in countries, it plateaus at about this level. And in fact, we've seen this in Germany, where the German equivalent of the IAB has found that about 19 to 20% is where ad blocking has plateaued at on desktop. Same thing in England. The IAB UK has found that about 22% is where their ad blocking desktop rate has stabilized. Next slide, please.
A question regarding that first. So what is Adblock's view on that? Is that a good number? Should it be more people blocking ads? Should it be less?
Well, we always think that, you know, it's anyone's right to block ads if they want to, but we don't think of it as a should or shouldn't. I mean, it's a, you know, I mean, it's a user's decision whether to block ads, block tracking, whatever. So we more look at it in the sense of that's the number we've arrived at, and it seems to be the number that sticks. And I just say that because in other countries, like, you know, Germany and the UK, which have grown ad blocking numbers and definitely have stabilized to a certain degree, we've seen that it stays about there. We're not quite there in the United States. The United States numbers are a little bit lower, but they're getting there.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So next slide then.
But the future is mobile. And I say that because we already know that the future is happening in Asia. And it's only a matter of time before mobile ad blocking comes over to North America and Europe. And in fact, mobile ad blocking outnumbers desktop ad blocking at this point. It just happened for the first time this year, but after 94% growth, which was just from the APAC region, we've seen that mobile, especially in mobile ad blocking browsers, so browsers you can download on your device that block ads out of the box, those are very popular in Asia, and we think that that's the future that's coming over here. That being said, we still think that it will stabilize somewhere around a quarter of users. So next slide, please. So that concludes where we are with ad blocking. I think the takeaway here is we have really, especially in places like Sweden, we have hit the top at desktop, but we are going to approach that in the years to come on mobile. And that is a pretty large number, but it still leaves, and we'll get to this later, it still leaves 75 to 80% of the users out there who are not and will not probably use ad blockers. That's where we are with ad blockers. But what about ads? So this actually is the first ad that ever ran on the internet. And you may be wondering why I'm showing that. It looks very old, very irrelevant at this point. But what you have to remember, I think, is when you point out, why or how we've gotten to this point is where we started. And this is it. This is an AT&T ad, and it's more important because of what it isn't than what it is. You see there that it has no AT&T branding on it whatsoever, and that's very odd. You can't imagine an ad having that nowadays. And also, if you clicked on it, there was no call to action. And as people involved in marketing, you'll know that you always want some sort of a call to action, but there was no call for people to become AT&T customers. In fact, if you clicked, as the ad instructs you to, you would go to a page where you would find out about museums and how the internet worked. But this gives us a clue as to how the internet was perceived back then. Back then, people looked at the internet truly as the information superhighway, a place where people would go to share ideas, to share information. And so the architects of this ad, and we know this because they've given interviews now, the architects of this ad didn't see it as an ad. They saw it as a way to share information. Again, this is important as to the perception of what the internet is and how or if we should advertise on it. And in fact, the guys who made it, and they were just guys, unfortunately, they said, we don't want to mess up this new medium. We want to keep this new medium pristine. We want to make very good ads. If you could go to the next slide, please. Then, quite some odd years later, the IAB in 2015 said, we messed up. We lost track of the user experience. So something happened in that time. And I'd like to again point out, this was no one group's fault. This was no thing that, there's no one to vilify here, in other words. But something did happen, and we'd be silly if we didn't recognize it. Clearly the IAB, they were saying that they lost track of users as they put more data on pages and as they made ads more prominent on pages and more numerous. If you go to the next slide, please. And actually, for the next three slides are related, so we can just go straight to slide 14, if you'd like. Yeah, so this is the vicious cycle. This is where we started. And so back then, we, of course, had that first basic banner ad that we saw. And shortly after that, the pop-up popped up. It was invented. And ad tech engineers, a new way for people to make money, they began to think of all the ways that we could advertise on this new engine called the internet. And of course, they went into the sandbox and they made the biggest castles and the most audacious things that they could. No, everyone else would have. This was a new medium, and they wanted to flex its muscles. But what ended up happening is the ads got more and more blinky. They got more and more annoying to the users, and as that started happening, users either ignored the ads or blocked them. So that's the second bit in the circle there. We know that they were ignoring the ads because in 1998, someone at, I believe it was Rice University, a professor coined the term banner blindness. We could actually do tests in this new medium as opposed to the old one and say, okay, are people seeing the ads? And what it turned out is that many weren't. Well, fast forward 4 years to 2002, and as I mentioned, that very first primitive ad blocking script was written. And then 2 years after that, we have WebWasher. So we know that users are not seeing the ads. And so you know, about 10 years after the very first internet ad, we know that they're actually actively blocking them. What's this lead to? Of course, publishers get less money per ad, and if you were making if you were making enough money on 3 ads on your web page, for instance, and suddenly you're making only 50% of what you used to make, the easiest thing to do is to just add 3 more ads, and then you've made up for that lost 50%. And that's what a lot of publishers naturally did. They just added more and more ads. Those ads had to be more attention grabbing, and that started to annoy users. And now we see our vicious circle fully going, and that's where we find ourselves. Again, no one's fault. This is sort of one of those self-feeding mechanisms. So if you go forward, please. And that's not the only problem we have in ad tech. Yeah, I'm talking, you guys are the experts here, so I won't belabor these points, but clearly one problem that ad tech has is that it's not simple. It's very, very difficult. All of the myriad steps that you take to get an ad from the marketer, or before that, the advertiser, to the publisher, are very, and eventually to the consumer, are very, very complex. Please, next one. Excuse me. And of course, we have issues of brand security, of ad placement. As you'll see in this sort of funny example, a lot of things, brands don't like the fact that their ads get placed in unfortunate spots. Real world example, what just happened with YouTube and Havas Media in the UK pulling out because their ads were appearing before some sort of white nationalist and racist videos on YouTube. They aren't happy about their ads being placed there. And that's not even to address issues like fraud. You know, there's something like at least 30% of the ads space out there, or the ads that are there, are actually fraud. So we have a lot of problems in advertising. And next slide, please. And as a user, ad blocking helps. It's fantastic. It's not quite as good as losing your virginity the first time you download an ad blocker, but it's pretty good. And for those 43% of you who use it, I think probably you would agree with me, you notice it the most when you go to someone's computer who's not using it. Suddenly you're seeing things like on the left screenshot here, where you can't even read a full headline on a page because there are so many ads there. Next slide, please. But the important takeaway from this very first half of the presentation is really not any of these numbers. It's not history of all of this, but it's what does ad blocking do to the user. And it gives the user an emotional feeling of being in control. And as we look back at that first ad, that wasn't even perceived as an ad, but was more perceived as sharing of information, we see that the internet did not have the same history as magazines and as newspapers and as television. Indeed, the internet had a history in which the user was always in control. It's an intimate tool to reach other people, which you use in a very intimate way because it's your machine, it's your computer, it's your tablet, it's your device. And what ad blocking did on an emotional level for users, I think, who felt that their sort of freedom had been robbed away and control had been wrested away through ads, they got that back. And I think that that's really the seminal point of why ad blocking is so popular. Next one, please. So you're probably assuming I'm just saying, so we should just block everything. No, absolutely not. Next slide. That's right. You're hearing it first from an ad blocker himself, we should not block everything because we have to consider things like journalism. We have to consider things like good content online, how that content gets to people. And there's got to be a way to where we can secure good content on the internet that is well funded by ads, but also one in which users are able to keep the sovereignty of their own screen. So the trick is how do we get those two? Can those two live in harmony? And as will probably come as no surprise to you, my answer is yes. What will probably surprise you a bit is to say that just as much as we see that vicious circle that happened before among advertisers, publishers, and the like, that had a lot of mistakes in it. But ad blocking also developed in the false way. Ad blocking should have always been ad filtering. It should never have been such a block tool, but it developed that way. So how do we, at this point in 2017, how do we pull that back a bit? How do we adjust not just ad blocking, but also advertising so that we can have good content but keep users in control? So next slide, please. So I'll speed up because I realize I'm low on time here. But the first thing I think we have to recognize is that we have two ecosystems. We have the first ecosystem I was talking about before, 75 to 80%, and that's the people who do not block ads. Next slide. But we have a second ecosystem, and we have to respect that ecosystem, and we have to treat that ecosystem to a specialized, different ad experience, and that ecosystem is probably going to be 25 to 30% of people. Next slide, please. Now, as you may know, there are a number of solutions for treating that second group. Probably the most popular one, because we've all heard about Google's purported plans to launch an ad blocker automatically into Chrome. They're doing that as part of the Coalition for Better Ads. And it may also surprise you to learn that I think the Coalition for Better Ads is a great idea. No comment on what Google's doing because that's not been confirmed yet. But as far as the Coalition for Better Ads, their idea is we will make ads so good that people will never download ad blockers. We, of course, think that's great, but we have a different approach. We think people will continue to download ad blockers and that we should reach that second ecosystem in a different way with a specialized experience. This is something, next slide please, we've called acceptable ads, and it's one that we've been running for 5 years now. We have found that you can serve ad blocking users a certain ad experience and that they will accept that experience so long as you stay away from some of the ads like pop-ups, auto-playing video, and so on. This is a graph of disruption rather that we did with Ipsos, but through a study with Ipsos. But you can notice that the Coalition for Better Ads had very, very similar data. The difference is we've been actually serving these ads to people who have downloaded ad blockers, not we directly serving them, but we've been making sure they fit criteria and allowing them through for 5 years, and guess what? It works. Only about 8% of our users opt out and elect to block everything. So, next slide. So, what are acceptable ads, you ask? And we can get into maybe this in the Q&A. But essentially, acceptable ads, they limit an ad based upon where it's placed, its size, and whether it's labeled correctly or not. If it meets those criteria, and they're a lot more specific actually, then it can be whitelisted. Next slide, please. But we have reached the limits of our expertise in shepherding this program. We've done this program alone with our users for the last 5 years, or 6 years, I should say. But we need to hand that off to an independent committee. We're doing this not just because we've reached the limits of our expertise, but we need that independent committee to make this the standard way that people block ads. So this independent committee, next slide please, we have already formed. They're meeting in New York. If any listeners are interested in joining, we are still taking applications. We are handing over control over what is acceptable and what is not for 130 to 150 million users and giving that control to this independent committee. As you can see, it's made up of a couple different sides, one that would represent users, one that would represent the ad industry. And essentially what it's going to do, we hope, next slide please, is to make constructive ad blocking the norm. A very great feature of the fact, or a very great side effect of the fact that we're making this independent is the fact that other ad blockers can sign on to it. So we can indeed say this can be a norm. This is not an Adblock Plus or an eyeo thing anymore. This is something other ad blockers can do, because now other people determine what gets through and what doesn't. And in fact, there are two independent ad blockers, Adblock and Crystal, that have signed up for this. And so they're starting to make this constructive ad filtering, not blocking, the norm in the industry. Next slide, please. And you know, this is just as opposed to the other type of ad blocking. The type of ad blocking that we mistakenly used to do, scorched earth, complete, black and white, block it all ad blocking. It's not the right way to go forward, and we're trying to pivot right now and make ad blocking a more pivotal part of, or more, I guess, constructive part of the ad ecosystem. Next slide. So you'll be glad to know I am done. I did rush through that last little bit, so happy to take some questions on it. But just to sum up, I think it's hard to argue with the fact that the internet is a different type of medium than than magazines and newspapers and the like, and that type of medium demands user control. So we have to live with user control, but that's actually a good thing, because if we look at the second thing there, two ecosystems, we can divide people who have taken very granular control of their internet experience, people who have downloaded ad blockers and content blockers like privacy tools of all kinds, and we can treat them to a different experience. But we have to listen to it, and we can't take away their rights to use things like that, because then they're just going to find other technological solutions around that. So recognizing that users have control, and then recognizing that we can treat them in different categories as different audiences is important, because finally, at that point, I think we do end up with a more fair and profitable web, one which we hope will have non-ad services. You may know we also have another offering called Flattr, which is a micro-payment system that we've actually a Swedish company that we acquired, and we've been developing software with them. But despite the fact that we very much think that will be a big player in the future, we still think that fewer, better, more profitable ads are going to be the main driver of monetary growth on the internet in the future. And we hope that we can in some way be a part of keeping user control, but also keeping the web profitable and fair. So I'm a little bit over time. I apologize, but that is a long story. So thank you for bearing with me. And I would hand it back over to you at this point, Matthew.
All right. Thank you very much, Ben, for that walkthrough of the sort of the history of ad blocking. As I mentioned, we've gotten some questions beforehand from our readers, and it's also open for people listening in on this webinar to ask questions in the chat window. So please feel free to do that if there are any questions you want to ask Ben. But before we jump into the questions, let's take another poll for you to see a bit where you're standing right now. The question we'd like to ask you now is, are you for or against ad blockers? And I'm going to switch to Swedish back again. Så nästa fråga är du för eller emot reklamblockerare som koncept? Varsågod och svara. All right, så där tar vi och stänger omröstningen, och då ser vi att de flesta är mer mot än för och skulle helst se att reklamblockerare försvann. Det är lika mellan de som är mer för än mot och de som är definitivt för. Och sen finns det vissa som är absolut emot och tycker att det är skadligt för reklambranschen. Låt oss gå tillbaka till Ben och se lite grann vad han har att säga om det här. So, all right, Ben, don't know if you got that, but as it turns out, 44% of the audience listening in are more against than pro ad blockers and would like to see them disappear. But then again, 22% are definitely pro ad blockers, and 22% are more pro than against. They find it to be a necessary evil. And then 11% are totally against it and thinks it's disruptive. So, first question for you. Don't you just want an ad-free internet?
No. In fact, I think what I was trying to point out is that ads are going to be the main driver of financial growth on the internet and driving well-funded content. That is probably not going to change. And what we found when we started acceptable ads was that the majority of our users didn't mind some ads if they were just smaller, less obstructive or obtrusive, and more respectful of the user. So I think that ads are an inextricable part of the internet, but it's just a matter of how we serve those ads and whom we serve them to.
All right. So next question. How do you propose that all the content producing people and organizations all around the internet would get paid if not through ads?
Well, I think, again, it'll be continually through ads, and I think that ads will continue to be the main driver of that. But, Tim Berners-Lee apparently wanted to put a dollar sign on Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the internet, wanted to put a dollar sign on the keyboard so that people could fund content. And I think that it's been way too long. The internet has existed way too long for us not to have an alternative way to fund content. And indeed, there are some places that have found a way to do that with paywalls and such, but they're normally just the big publications that can afford to do something like that. So I think what we need is something that works across the entire internet. And as I mentioned briefly with Flattr, we're actually trying to do that right now. It's essentially something where users will put a certain amount of money in their account each month, and they will just surf the internet as they always do. And the money then will be dispersed according to where they spend their time. Right. And so I do think that the internet's been waiting for something like that. Maybe we'll get it right. Maybe Flattr will be the way. I hope it is, surely, of course. But maybe it won't. But I think something will. I think that's coming.
All right. So you have been called terrorists by the IAB. Are you terrorists? Are you destroying the ad business, the publisher's business?
Well, I don't think so. I look around me at work, and I don't see people who are terrorists. Like, no, the IAB has their message out there, and they've decided that they want to make put a bad image up of us because they don't always look to make, I think, constructive decisions. They don't see us as a legitimate player in this. And I, of course, disagree with that. I would not make the same play as the IAB. I think that the thing you can say about the IAB is the good thing you can say about the IAB is they occasionally have good ideas, like the Lean Initiative. I brought this up before. If there's a criticism that I think is fair of the IAB, it's that sometimes they're not very good at implementing those great ideas. And indeed, we've seen that. I mean, where has Lean actually gotten? It took a different coalition to sort of put that idea into place. So, we try to take a different approach and try to implement our ideas and test them even at our own risk. And so I don't think that doing that is in any way terroristic. I think it's optimistic, honestly. So.
Okay. But I mean, you can't dodge the fact that you are ruining business for certain publishers. Aren't you ashamed of doing that?
No, I don't think we're we're ruining the business of publishers. I think that, as I was trying to point out in the presentation, what happened was that ads got to a bad state, and no one was at fault for that. And I certainly don't think that ad blocking was the cause of that. Ad blocking sprang up as a symptom because people were not willing to look at the ads. So it's essentially a user created thing. I mean, the guy who wrote Adblock Plus was just a user who wanted to block ads for himself. It just turns out that a lot of other people felt the same way. So I think that it's more of a symptom of where ads were going. And even though, as I was saying, the sort of scorched earth complete ad blocking was not the right approach to do it, and it's still in some ways ad blocking a corrective to where we're learning about what users want, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, if in every other branch that I can think of, you would take something like ad blocking as raw, valuable consumer feedback, and that's exactly what it is. So I think it's our job. Now I would put us in that category too, since we are involved in trying to make better ads for ad blockers. I think it's all of our jobs to just listen to users and continually do so. I mean, if acceptable ads were a bad idea, and if it ever were, then people would start blocking out acceptable ads and blocking everything, and we'd know we were doing the wrong thing too. So yeah, I just think it's long story short, it's a feedback mechanism we should take constructively.
Okay. So you partly answered my next question, but what is the next step for Adblock Plus?
Well, I mean, I like to think of us not just as Adblock Plus, but as eyeo. eyeo is the company that owns Adblock Plus. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just saying, because it is a two-part process. We want to keep users in control of the internet, but we want the internet to be fair and to be profitable and to be open. And so I think part of that process is the Acceptable Ads Committee. Determining the ad experience for 130 to 150 million users, and that's a growing number, is quite a responsibility. And the Coalition for Better Ads is wonderful, but unless there's automatic ad blocking in a browser, then and users are pleased with that, it basically doesn't have any enforcement mechanism. That as opposed to the Acceptable Ads Committee. The Acceptable Ads Committee has an audience already, and they're valuable. They're younger, college-educated, tech-savvy people marketers want to get at. And what we've learned is that they'll accept some ads, but not all ads. That's A. B is micropayments. I think that funding and rewarding great content is wonderful and something that's going to happen online, and it's going to encourage the better content we all want to read out there and discourage the bad fake news and the clickbait that we all want to avoid.
So do you think that you and ad blockers will ever become obsolete?
I don't think so. I mean, this is a question we've gotten a lot recently because of the idea that a popular browser might automatically block ads. I don't think so, because I think that at the end of the day, browsers have changed a lot over the years. If you remember, Firefox made a pop-up blocker in 2004, and now all browsers have pop-up blockers. So I think that things like that are going to continue as browsers continue to evolve, but that's not going to get rid of a lot of the ads out there that users find the most annoying. Like, users really don't like pre-roll videos. So I think that the need for ad blockers is going to continue to be there. And as long as it is, we will try, we hope that the Acceptable Ads Committee will be able to find ads that those users will accept.
All right. So you mentioned it a couple of times, and obviously some of our readers have observed it as well. Google, there's rumors that Google are doing their own ad blocker. What do you think of that?
Well, I'll have to disappoint you guys on this one. I can't say anything officially because it is just a rumor at this point, and so I really can't say if it does in fact happen, then we'll be happy to comment on it. I guess the only thing that I can say now is that we think that there will be a continual need for ad blocking in the future, no matter what happens on this front or very related.
All right, so my follow-up question, and there's been a lot of speculation about why Google is doing this. Is there something you can comment on that?
I got to disappoint you guys again. I'm sorry, I just can't. Until it's a fact, then we got to kind of stay mum on this. I'm sorry.
No worries, fair enough. So, but one thing that is happening is the fact that you are white labeling Google's sites. How do you justify taking money from them to let their ads through? Is one of the questions we've gotten.
Well, it's important to remember that we have whitelisted Google search ads because that's not all Google ads, all Google sites, whatever. And we did that after Google, like everyone else, went through, submitted their ads to their search ads to the criteria, and those ads were found to meet the criteria. As for whitelist, sorry, please.
Yeah, so it's not they're just paying to push their ads through?
No, absolutely not. And that's a big misconception about how whitelisting works. People think that you can just come in with a big sack of money and say, I'm company X and I want my ads to go through. Ads first have to meet the criteria because if someone came in and said, hey, here's some money, please put up an auto-playing video ad, we'd lose all our users overnight. So the first thing that ads have to do is they have to meet the criteria. Again, we're not going to be determining the criteria anymore. They're going to be independent, but the first thing they have to do is meet the criteria. Then, if you are a very large publisher, if it requires us to do a lot of work, because there's a lot of technical heavy lifting and monitoring and keeping a continual relationship with whoever that whitelisting partner is, then there is a payment involved for our service, of course, but it's only based upon the value that we create, so value that wasn't there before, and it's only about 10% of the people on the whitelist. So a good way to think about it is 100% of the people on our whitelist have to meet the criteria. There's no way around that, but only about 10% then pay for the service of whitelisting.
All right. So last one of our questions we got beforehand. Will there be ad blocking glasses as I'm walking down the street blocking ads from my view?
We haven't made it that far yet, but there could be. If anyone's seen that really terrible 80s movie, They Live, anyone know that?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. So maybe at some point in the future, maybe that will be a collaboration with like Google Glasses. We'll see.
Yeah. I think there was a group of students that actually did some tests on that, but I'm not 100%, but it would be interesting.
For sure. But for now, I think the billboards are safe though. If you're a billboard maker and you're on the line, I wouldn't worry about things for now.
So it's not in your pipeline?
Not in our immediate pipeline now. Our big thing right now is mobile. We're really trying to push mobile.
All right. So as I mentioned, the chat has been open throughout, and we have some questions that have come in through that. So I'm just gonna fire away and see what you think about it. So we've got one question. Sure. I want to avoid being ad blocked. What do I do? Well, I would recommend that you would come to us and talk to us about getting whitelisted. Maybe not all of your ads would meet the criteria, but some of them would. And we would be happy to go through that process with you. All right. So another question that's come in, why do you get to decide what is a better ad and what's not?
Well, we don't. Actually, that committee I showed you before is deciding what's a better ad and what isn't. But of course,
yeah, well, that is now, but
right. But what was before? No,
6 months ago.
I get it. I wasn't trying to dodge a question. I promise. I was coming back to it.
All right.
No, it's a fair question. It's a fair question. But the bottom line is that we decided we wanted to make a change, and we were doing that for our users. So we were making a change that could have lost us all of our users at a certain point, and we decided we're going to still tell those users you can block everything if you want, because that's their right. But we're going to make a significant change to what the majority of how you receive the software by default. So to use a car metaphor, like this is the standard we're giving you the car in, and after that it's up to you to modify. But this is the standard because we think it's the best. We do. We think it's better to not block everything. And so, of course, we had to ultimately make the call on what those standards would be. But we did it based upon audience surveys of our users. We polled our users significantly. The Ipsos study I showed you before was something we did several years afterwards to see, are we on the right track here? And we, now that we've made it independent, I think it's definitely a lot better. But even before then, remember, we couldn't have just started whitelisting anything because we always had the motivation of keeping the opt-out rate from our users low. Our users could have just easily gone to some other ad blocker,
Okay.
And so, yeah, that was always our motivation from the beginning, but we are very excited that is no longer our responsibility because I'll be honest with you, it's a hard job. It's tough figuring out what ad blockers are okay with.
Yep. All right. I don't doubt you. But concerning the hard job, one question we've gotten here is, have you ever been sued? And if so, what happened?
Oh, yeah, we've been sued 6 times. 6 times in Germany.
6 times in Germany?
Yeah, we won every time. That's the good news. But we have been sued by basically every major publishing house in Germany, including Axel Springer. You guys probably know Axel Springer. Spiegel has sued us, so is Süddeutsche Zeitung. That's one of the newspapers of record in Germany. We've won every time, basically, and essentially the charges have always been the same, that we shouldn't be able to allow users to block ads on sites that are owned by these publishers. And the courts have consistently, for various reasons, including copyright, anti-competition law, that's the grounding for it. But the courts have consistently said, no, it is a user's right to do that. And so, yeah, a lot of those decisions have been appealed. One of the Axel Springer one, for instance, is going to go to the German Supreme Court. But we remain confident in our assessment that the courts will find that ad blocking is a user's right.
Okay. So a follow-up question that just popped up. What would you like to say to Swedish media that want to sue you?
Don't. Don't. No. In all seriousness, I don't want to say anything right now. It's going to get me in trouble in court, of course. But no, I think that it is a user's right to determine their online experience. And working, if I can just use Germany as an example, there have been working through the legal channels has not been successful yet. And I don't think it sends the right message to users in general. But it's not just the legal challenges. We've also, of course, had tech challenges. There are the sort of whack-a-mole games that people play with circumvention, things like that. And I would have a very similar answer. Even though we're just one company, there's lots of ad blockers out there, and ad blockers are partially maintained by a very large open source community. So even when the big comers like Facebook come and try to circumvent, there are a lot of people that try to prevent that. And ultimately, I just think that sort of these types of cat and mouse games are fruitless. So of course, it won't surprise you to hear me say this. I don't think that the legal or the technical or even the PR, harkening back to the IABUS, I don't think those are the right ways to deal with ad blocking. I think that there are more direct ways where you can deal with ad blockers, and in so doing, be essentially constructive. And again, if you don't like the Acceptable Ads Committee, I think it's the best idea. But there's also the Coalition for Better Ads. That's not a bad idea in and of itself, because it doesn't get into any of those sort of futile distractions, and it gets right at the heart of the problem while keeping the user in control. So, if you want to know more about the Acceptable Ads Committee, I'm happy to talk to anyone afterwards. My email address is ben@adblockplus.org, so let me know. And the Coalition for Better Ads, I'm sure they're still accepting members. So short answer is, I think approaching users in a constructive way is the better solution.
Okay, great. So you mentioned that your main focus right now is mobile. So one question is, will there be an ad-free mobile phone?
I don't think there'll be a completely ad-free phone because the apps are currently a problem. I mean, you can't block ads in apps. But I think that there already are ad-free browsers, and we forget how often we access things online. And I honestly, I think you're going to have a couple news apps on your phone, but basically to get a lot of the content that we consume online, we still do go to browsers. Anytime someone sends you a message on WhatsApp with a link, that's going to open in your browser. So I think that that's going to be the chosen method, and I'm not just speculating there and doing so in a fanciful way because we happen to make an ad blocking browser. I'm doing it based upon what's happening in Asia. I mean, Asia has huge breaks, and the difference is motivation. There's still the annoyance factor. It's a smaller screen. People don't want to be distracted from what they're doing. They sometimes click on ads on accident because of their thumbs. But I think it's more about bandwidth and saving people data. If you're blocking the ads or some of the ads, you're going faster and you're not using as much of your data when you're on the go. So that tends to be the motivation for people doing it.
All right. So you mentioned the coalition. Are there any Swedish companies on the coalition as we speak?
You mean our Acceptable Ads Committee?
Oh, yes, the Acceptable Ads Committee, sorry.
Yes, there is a representative. He's not representing the company as an individual. His name's Henrik, and he works at a company called Adtoma. They are in the Ad Tech Coalition. And we are, like I said, taking applications. We have several different coalitions for people on the phone. We do have on the one side an actual user and digital rights organization. Not sure if anybody from those groups will be on. We also have welcoming professors and just sort of independent experts. But probably where we're getting at most of the people on the call are on what we call the for-profit coalition. In the for-profit coalition, we have ad tech, we have publishers, we have advertisers, and we have marketing agencies. And I would invite anyone to go to acceptableads.com to check out more on that, and especially about the committee. You can see all of the members on there. And and you can also reach out to us through a contact form there if you're interested in joining.
All right, brilliant. So, final question. How much money do you make?
I don't make very much at all, actually. I just came back from Berlin last night. It's not like I was flying first class. Far from it. No, I can just say, we are still a private company. If we open up and become public, we'll make all of our finances completely open. But at this point, we are in the black. I can say that. And we are a growing company. We have about 80 employees, hope to grow to about 100 this year, and are centered in 3 places now, in Cologne, in Berlin, and our newest office, because of our Flattr acquisition, in Malmö. So, we're happy to be a growing company.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you very much, Ben, and thanks to all of you attending this webinar. As I mentioned before, this webinar will be available to a recording, and also the slides will be made available. If you have any further questions, please address them either to me or Matthias at dagensanalyse.se or Ben at adblockplus.com. Am I correct?
So adblockplus.org.
Oh, sorry, .org. Sorry. All right, Ben at adblockplus.org. Thank you very much. I wish you a very pleasant evening, and thank you for checking out dagensanalyse.se.
Thanks, everybody.